Tyrus Raymond Cobb. Growing up in the small rural town of Royston, Georgia, I heard this name almost constantly. The town's claim to fame, I grew up viewing Cobb as nothing less than the greatest player to ever play the game of baseball. As I grew older, I found that many shared in my admiration for his record-setting feats on the diamond. But what surprised me was that just as many, if not more, people knew him for his exploits off the field, citing him as a vile racist or even a murderer. Suddenly, my love for one of my childhood heroes was called into question. How could the hero of my little hometown be the monster that people kept telling me he was? It just didn't add up. I grew up viewing Cobb as a great player and person, not just the man who batted a career record .367 batting average, but also the man who donated money for the local hospital and left a legacy in the community that is still felt today. I struggled with these conflicting views for years until I picked up Charles Learson's book, Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. The book presented evidence that calls into question or flat out disproves many of the rumors surrounding Cobb's persona. I began to realize that Cobb's legacy may be even more complicated than I thought, and set out to separate the man from the myth.
That if you give people something they want to believe, they will take it and run with it and make it their own.
Mean, competitive, he didn't want to lose anything.
Wade Hoyt told me that Ty Cobb was the meanest person he's ever met in his life.
He was admired and hated by fans for his ferocious play on the diamond and for his outrageous conduct on and off the field.
The most feared man in the history of baseball.
He would beat up his own breakfast before he ate. He was just not a nice
Sounds
guy.
Fantastic.
I didn't set out to right any wrongs or clean up Cobb's reputation. Indeed, as I've told you, I originally set out to soil it some more. But in trying to start from scratch and tell the story of a man's life, I wound up with a biography that, for better or worse, comes with a message. And the message is simply this: stop talking for a minute and listen, because there's a lot of evidence to the contrary.
Welcome to Royston, Georgia, population 2,574. Known for a thriving poultry industry, Blazers chicken wings, and as the hometown of baseball legend Ty Cobb.
My name is Julie Ridgeway. I'm the curator, director of the Ty Cobb Museum. The majority of the people in Royston recognize him for his philanthropy, for making that $100,000 donation to build the first hospital here. I think there's a great respect for a vast majority of the individuals in Royston for that.
I'm talking to someone out of the area and they want to know where I was from, and they don't know Royston, Georgia. Never heard of it, but I say it's the hometown of Ty Cobb, and they all, oh yeah, so they know it, all about it then. But they do come in and want to go see the mausoleum and find out, well, there's a museum there too.
Ty Cobb's legacy in Royston didn't just start in 1950 with the building of the Cobb Memorial Hospital. Actually, Cobb's legacy goes back to 1896 when the Cobbs moved there. And then, you know, so many things in baseball happened while he was right here in Royston. And he learned to play the game of baseball in Royston and perfect the game that he knows. Some of the little things that he implemented in baseball was learned right here on the sandlots of Royston.
As far as an individual, and his playing too, you know, he was a very fierce competitor, you know, just unbelievable competitor. And anybody that's a name in sports that sets records is going to be a fierce competitor. You're going to see that.
Real aggressive attitude and a high spirit, and he wanted to be great and he wanted to be good, and he was good.
I appreciate the fact that everybody has their own hero, but when you compare the numbers, all the other players pale in comparison to Cobb. He was the greatest. He had the highest batting average. It'll probably never be approached at .367. You know, his 4,191 hits. You know how many players that don't even have 4,000 or don't even have 3,000 that we look upon as superstars today. The managers eventually got smart about how to handle Cobb, and they said if he makes it past first, throw the ball to third. And that was sort of their mentality, and that's how he changed the game. He actually done more than just change the game, but he changed the mentality of how people approach the game.
Cobb's teammate, infielder Germany Schaefer, said, Ty Cobb is a game-square fellow who never cut a man with his spikes intentionally in his life, and anyone who gets by with his spikes knows it.
I don't think Ty Cobb ever sharpened his spikes. I think that's a myth and a legend that began somewhere, but it worked to his advantage, so he probably never corrected the story. But as far as him actually sharpening his spikes, I became friends with Jimmy Lanier, who was his bat boy in 1925 and 26, and he always talked about his job was to clean Mr. Cobb's shoes after every game. And he said he never saw any evidence where someone had tampered with his spikes. You know, there's this one legend about this ball player that was handed down through the generations, that he was a mean, evil-spirited baseball player who would slash someone from ear to ear just to steal a base. But that wasn't true at all.
The Negro should be accepted wholeheartedly and not grudgingly, he said. The Negro has the right to play professional baseball, and who's to say he has not? Ty Cobb, it turned out, descended from a long line of abolitionists. His great-grandfather was a minister who preached against slavery and was run out of town for his troubles. His grandfather was the equivalent of a conscientious objector who refused to fight in the Confederate Army because of the slavery issue. And his father was an educator and state senator who spoke out for his black constituents and had a very short political career as a result, and once broke up a lynch mob in town.
It wasn't only mean to black always mean to anybody. That was Ty Cobb.
As a person, I think he was very misunderstood. Being an armchair psychologist, I would put Ty Cobb in sort of an eccentric type personality. That type personality is very driven. They know what they want to do. They don't care what other people think. It's not that they want to hurt somebody else's feelings. It's just they're driven. They're very driven to do their own thing, and they don't care what other people think about them. So I think that this kind of one of the misunderstood aspects of his life. I just think he was a very unique individual.
I didn't know very much about Mr. Cobb before I read Ron's screenplay. I'd heard his name mentioned on the playing fields of West Texas, where I grew up. Usually the most aggressive kid who was willing to fight and bite and scratch and actually kill for the next hit or the next base was commonly compared to Cobb. And that's about all I knew.
I know it was a disappointment for me because the first time I had went to Augusta in early 90s was when the movie came out. And when we got there, we went over to the Cobb home. Miss Beverly Ford and Marion Bray, they gave us a tour of the Cobb home. And then we went out and saw the movie at the theater. And when I left, I was really disappointed because of the inaccuracies in the movie. A little bit entertaining, but a lot less built on facts.
All right, when the movie came out and everybody felt like we'd been slapped in the face, the Ty Cobb Healthcare Systems Board, who was chaired at the time by the same man that was on the committee to build the original Ty Cobb Shrine back in the 60s. Well, they were discussing it one day and talking about how embarrassed they were and about how disappointed, and they needed to do something to set the record straight. That's why the museum's here. It's because of that movie.
But what does this legacy mean, and what can we learn from a legacy as complicated as Cobb's? I sat down with Georgia Tech professor Matthew Ventresca to get his thoughts.
My name's Matt Ventresca. I'm a sports sociologist in the School of History and Sociology here at Georgia Tech. I think that sport historians view Ty Cobb as an enigma. Someone who, the more you look into, the more you pull apart the layers of his life and his persona, the more complexity and the more controversy that you might find concerning him. Not someone who's definitely simple or easy to understand. We are placing more scrutiny on the heroes of the past to understand sort of who they are and understand their legacy. Part of that is to understand what happened in the past and understand them in the context of when they played the sport. Should we be celebrating these people like we should have when they were perhaps more complex figures than we thought they were. For me, as a sociologist, what Ty Cobb teaches us about the current context, which is what I'm interested in, is I think it provides a bit of a window into the moral value system that defines baseball as an American institution. Looking at Cobb allows us to think about what transgressions we're allowed to accept as a culture and what ones we reject and think are crossing some sort of moral or ethical line. There are things that we are desperate to celebrate about Ty Cobb, both his on-field greatness but also his will to win. That is something that I think we can very much identify with. We also are uncomfortable as a culture with what that will to win sort of forced or coerced him to do. And I think that polarization makes him perhaps one of the most interesting figures to look at in the history of all American sports.
In terms of Cobb's legacy, all I know for certain is that the greatness of Ty Cobb was something that had to be seen, and to see it was to remember it forever.
I think the next goal, short-term goal for me, is to set up some presentations in the local area so that we can educate the local folks on Ty Cobb, his batting record, his base running record, and the philanthropic deeds that he did. His legacy today has suffered some bruises and broken parts. But thanks to Charles Learson's book and other work that's being done, we're actually getting the other side of Cobb and the facts out to the public so that they can come to their own conclusion.
Everybody would say, well, of course y'all are going to say nice things about him. This is his hometown. This is his museum, Well, here this very accomplished sports writer, he writes this book, and all of a sudden people sit up and take notice. I have people come in now that are they smile when they come in and they say, I've read this book and I'm so glad to know that somebody's finally putting an end to some of these negative things.
No one ever played the game the same way he did. He was the greatest baseball player that ever lived, and I cherish the fact that I have my name associated with him, even in the smallest way.
So what can we learn from the legacy of Ty Cobb? He was undoubtedly one of the best to play the game, and this new evidence suggests that he may not have been the grumpy old monster many thought him to be. Was he perfect? No, but none of us are. All we know for sure is that the more we learn about the legend of Ty Cobb, the greater it becomes.